Good evening, and thank you for joining us here at the 92nd Street Y. I'm Seth Pinsky, and I'm the CEO of this amazing institution. Let me be the first to welcome you, both in person and online, to the SAPIR Debates at the 92nd Street Y. Tonight's question is both contentious and timely. Does Zionism have a future on the American left? Now, you might be thinking that is a question about which, in the current environment, it's going to be difficult to debate civilly. But hosting open discourse and bringing people together is core to our mission here at the 92nd Street Y. That's worth applauding. Doing so is in our DNA and has been part of who we are since our founding by German Jewish civic leaders over 150 years ago. In these polarizing times, therefore, we hope to serve as a model for a better way of communicating, fostering more nuance in the ways that we look at our society, and having the great minds of our day grapple with these questions in a thoughtful and respectful way. And now about our partners. For those unfamiliar, SAPIR is a quarterly journal edited by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Bret Stephens that explores ideas for a thriving Jewish future. Over the last few years, SAPIR has become among the most important outlets for diverse, even contradictory views from leading voices inside and outside of the organized Jewish world. If you're not a reader, you can access the essays and a hard copy of the journal for free by visiting sapirjournal.org. As we prepare for tonight's event, we ask that you vote on a poll question that you can find via the QR code on the card that you were handed as you entered the hall. And if you're joining us online, you should see the QR code on screen. And I'm going to ask that everyone please take a few seconds now, if you haven't done so already, to take out your phones and vote. So we'll wait a few seconds for you to do that. While everyone is voting, I will add that after you've heard tonight's conversation, we're going to ask you to vote again on the same question to see if you and your fellow audience members were swayed by what you heard. And we'll show you the outcomes of the voting at the end of the evening. Thank you. The moderator for tonight's debate is SAPIR's Editor-in-Chief and New York Times columnist, Bret Stephens. If you have questions for our panelists during tonight's event, you can submit them via the same QR code and web address that you used to cast your vote. And the ushers will also be handing out index cards if you'd like to submit a question the old-fashioned way. As always, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible during the discussion. And now, please give a warm 92nd Street Y welcome to our moderator, Bret Stephens.
Well, good evening, and thank you, and welcome to the second SAPIR debate at the 92nd Street Y. Does Zionism have a future on the American left? I think most of us in this room would agree that this could hardly be a more timely discussion and debate, most of all right here in the heart of New York City. Before I start, I really want to thank once again the 92nd Street Y. 30 years ago, when I was fresh out of the University of Chicago, I had the opportunity to sit where you are this evening to listen to a presentation, a kind of a short play by David Mamet. I thought it was one of the most brilliant things I'd ever heard, and I knew then that this institution, unique not only in New York City, but unique in the United States, is a temple of Jewish culture, of Jewish ideas, of Jewish learning, of Jewish debate, and even of some fun. And I've always been grateful to the 92nd Street Y for constantly providing stages for a wide range of thinkers with different ideas, different experiences of life to share this extraordinary stage. So once again, please thank the organizers, our host, the 92nd Street Y. A program note, I don't know if this is true, but there is a chance that there are people in the audience, I hope it's not true, that there are people in the audience who intend to disrupt our debate with heckling or other forms of disruption. The people around you, if you are one of those people, look to the people around you. They came here to listen to a spirited debate among intelligent people who take opposing views. There will be an opportunity at the end of the debate for you to ask your own questions. I promise I will do my best to ask the hardest questions that come into my hand, but please be respectful of the people around you and know that every time you heckle us, the Mossad has promised to deposit $1 million in numbered Swiss bank accounts in our names. So, and that was a joke in case you missed it. Now, to the debate itself. We are in an environment which is not unique in Jewish history, but I think feels for many people in this room relatively new to our experience as Americans and relatively new to our experience, in fact, wholly new to our experience perhaps as New Yorkers. It is undeniable that the 2 years since October 7th, 2023, the 750 days of war in Gaza, that the sands of support for Israel have shifted on both the left and the right. Poll after poll reveal an America that is clearly and perhaps irreversibly changing its perceptions of the Jewish state. Earlier this year, Pew Research found that more than half of American adults, 53%, now express an unfavorable view of Israel. Nowhere is this trend more prevalent than among those on the left, and that is why this debate is about the left. I know there can be a separate debate about the right. We are now talking about the left. In September, a New York Times poll found that 53% of Democrats side with Palestinians, while only 13% expressed greater support for Israelis, a major reversal from 2 years prior. This evening's debate does not focus on the tides of today. It is concerned with the trends of tomorrow. And it doesn't ask whether the American left objects to the current Israeli government. It does, of course. It asks whether the American left will welcome those who identify as Zionists with the State of Israel. Can one be a critic of Israeli policies, not its existence, and still be embraced on the left? And ultimately, is there a future for Zionism on this side of the political and ideological spectrum? The answer is by no means obvious. And that's why we brought in an all-star roster of panelists to help us debate the proposition. And I will now introduce them, and they will come out on stage as I introduce them. Answering yes to the proposition is Yehuda Kurtzer, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute and host of the popular podcast Identity Crisis, or Identity/Crisis. An author of 2 books, Yehuda is one of the American Jewish world's leading thinkers and writers, and we're privileged to have him here on our stage. Please join me in welcoming Yehuda Kurtzer. Also, arguing for the proposition is the Honorable Kathy Manning, current chair of the Democratic Majority for Israel. Until January, Kathy was a member of Congress from North Carolina, who served as the lead Democrat on the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism. Before entering American politics, she jostled in Jewish politics, where she became the first woman ever to serve as chair of the National Board of the Jewish Federation of North America. We are thrilled to have her here. Please give a warm welcome to Kathy Manning. Now, answering no to today's question is the great writer, columnist, and New York Times best-selling author, Jamie Kirchick. A fun fact about Jamie, he is reported from over 40 countries, and today he is reporting from the faraway land known as the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Please join me in welcoming Jamie. And last, but certainly not least, arguing for the case against the proposition is the brilliant Batya Ungar-Sargon, the new host of the show Batya on News Nation and author of the forthcoming book, The Left and the Jews. You've seen Batya in numerous outlets as a contributor on CNN, Fox, and a frequent guest of Real Time with Bill Maher. We're so glad that she's here with us. Please welcome Batya Ungar-Sargon. Now, because of the results of a coin toss, we are going to proceed with opening statements. Kathy will speak next, then Batya, then Yehuda, then Jamie. Then we'll have an open discussion for a little over a half an hour, turn it over to audience questions, then we're going to have a vote. And while you guys vote, we're going to do something that happens at few other debates that I know of. We're going to ask everyone to have something good to say about the other side, trying to break with current traditions. So let's begin. Kathy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. For more than 75 years, the American left, the Democratic Party, has been home to Zionists, men and women who believe in the right of the Jewish people to build their own country in their ancestral homeland. The bond between Democrats and Israel is reflected in our history. President Harry Truman was the first world leader to recognize the state of Israel just 11 minutes after David Ben-Gurion declared its independence. President John Kennedy provided Israel with vital diplomatic support and authorized the first sale of anti-aircraft missiles to strengthen Israel's defense. President Lyndon Johnson deepened that commitment, expanding U.S. arms sales and laying the foundation for the strategic alliance that safeguards both nations today. President Bill Clinton was committed to Israel's security, increased bilateral cooperation, and had a deep personal connection to its leaders, evidenced by his touching eulogy at Yitzhak Rabin's funeral. President Barack Obama signed the largest security MOU in U.S. history, $38 billion over 10 years, ensuring Israel's qualitative military edge and supporting the Iron Dome missile defense system. President Joe Biden, who called himself a proud Zionist, was the first sitting U.S. president to travel to Israel in wartime after the October 7th Hamas attack. He went to console Israelis in their darkest hour and to show the world that America stands with Israel. Under his leadership, the U.S. moved 2 aircraft carrier groups to the region, helped intercept missile attacks from Iran, and provided 2 supplemental aid packages totaling more than $14 billion. I served in the House when both of those aid packages passed, and I can tell you the overwhelming majority of Democrats supported them both. Yes, Democratic presidents have sometimes disagreed with Israeli leaders, as close friends often do, but none has ever disavowed the U.S.-Israel alliance or questioned Israel's right to exist and defend itself. It's no mystery why Democrats have long stood by Israel. The world's only Jewish state embodies the very principles that have defined the Democratic Party for generations. In a region often defined by authoritarianism, Israel is a vibrant democracy with free and fair elections, a free press, free speech, an independent judiciary where all citizens, Jews, Arabs, Druze, women, minorities, LGBTQ individuals, can seek justice in the courts, a dynamic society built by immigrants from around the world, renowned universities, scientists, and entrepreneurs whose innovations have improved lives everywhere, military and intelligence cooperation that directly enhances American security. These are not just Israeli values, they are democratic values. They are why Israel has always been a natural ally of the United States and of the American left, the Democratic Party. The war in Gaza has shaken many Democrats. The images of civilian suffering are heartbreaking and have raised many questions. But to question a government's policies is not to reject a nation's right to exist. Democrats have never called for the destruction of another democracy, nor will they start now. As this war ends and the peace plan is implemented, Democrats will undoubtedly question some of the policy decisions being made by the Israeli government and by our own government. But Democrats will continue to support the right of the Jewish people to self-determination and security in their homeland. There will always be outliers on the far left, just as there are extremists on the far right. But we should not confuse the loudest voices with the largest majority. The overwhelming majority of Democrats will continue to stand with the country that shares our democratic values, enhances our security, brings innovation to the world, and embodies the fulfillment of 2,000 years of Jewish yearning to be a free people in their own land, the land of Zion. So the answer to the question before us tonight, yes, Bret, Zionism has a future on the American left.
Thank you, Kathy. Batya, to you.
So first of all, thank you to the 92nd Street Y for having me. Thank you all for coming, for engaging in this civic discourse and debate. Having people that you disagree with but respect is the most precious thing as an American, as a Jew, and as a journalist. So I'm very, very honored to be here. This week, a far-left progressive candidate for Senate in Maine, a veteran and oyster farmer named Graham Plattner, was revealed to have a tattoo on his chest, which is a Nazi SS insignia. Now, Plattner claimed that he got the tattoo 20 years ago in Croatia while drunk with fellow Marines and had no idea it was a symbol for the Nazis until now. Acquaintances have disputed this. I'm less interested in Plattner than I am in the response to him from the left. And what the left did was it circled the wagons around him. So Bernie Sanders is standing by him. Former Obama staffers who have one of the biggest progressive podcasts are standing by him. I want to read you a typical response from a very big progressive podcaster on Twitter. She wrote, "For me personally, I'll take a candidate with a regrettable tattoo." Did you hear that? A Nazi tattoo is a regrettable tattoo. "Over one who has steadfastly supported a genocide." So let's just think about that for a minute. There's room in the progressive movement for a person with a tattoo honoring the perpetrators of an actual genocide, but not for those opposing the fiction that there was a genocide in Gaza. These are the same people defending this guy with a Nazi tattoo who spent years denouncing Zionists as genocide enablers, the same people who defended chants for globalize the Intifada, and we all know what that means, are now defending this guy with his Nazi tattoo, the same people who championed a mayoral candidate who doesn't believe that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. This is what he has said, and that is literally the definition of Zionism. That is the future of the left. It's clear that the left's ideal version of itself is one that contains no Zionists, which is why on college campuses, in universities, in progressive politics, and the media, they have gone out of their way to stigmatize Zionists and make them feel unwelcome. The word Zionist on the left is a slur now. I want to be clear. It's not Jews who are unwelcome, okay? Because Jews are very welcome on the left. if they are willing to denounce their own people, if they are willing to get on their knees and beg for acceptance and say, I denounce Israel, I repudiate my Zionism, then there is all the room in the world for them on the left. In fact, they're some of the most beloved members of the left. It's Zionism that's the problem. And I want to make a point to Kathy's point. We're not defending the proposition that Zionism doesn't have a future in the Democratic Party. I imagine there are a lot of Democrats here who are fighting tooth and nail for the Democratic Party and for the right of proud Jews to be members of the Democratic Party. And I applaud you, because that is God's work, okay? Let's not forget about John Fetterman, our hero, who's always standing up for us. But yeah, that's right. But according to John Fetterman himself, his Zionism puts him out of step with the rest of his party, which, I'm sorry, only 13% stand with Israelis against the Palestinians. This is a party whose grassroots is right now captured by the left. And so Zionism does not have a future in the American left. The Democratic Party's relationship with Zionism depends on whether it's willing to repudiate that far left. And the thing that makes this so appalling is that Jews built the left in this country. We built the labor movement. We broke the New Deal. 70% of the lawyers who worked on civil rights cases were Jews. We've been at the forefront of every liberal and leftist issue in this country. The absolute chutzpah of saying, you're not welcome here. You know what it reminds me of? When they banned smoking in bars. I was a smoker, and I was so outraged. I was like, if there's going to be a turf war over this, surely the smokers should have gotten the bars, okay? And you can so easily imagine a counterfactual in which the left in America said, wait a minute. We can't oppose Zionism because we would lose our beloved Jews who have been there with us at the forefront every minute that we built this movement. We have to find a way to make sure that Zionists still feel welcome. We could never do that to them. And they didn't do that. They did the opposite. One last
sentence.
One last very, very quick thing. Okay. If at any point on this stage you hear somebody say, or you're thinking to yourself, the right has a problem with anti-Semitism too, the right has a problem with anti-Zionism too, you're agreeing with us, because that too means it's on both sides, and we're not going to argue. Jamie's going to talk about this.
All right.
We're not going to argue that the right is perfect.
We're gonna,
all right.
All right. Yehuda. And can I get the clock back and with the extra time for Yehuda to make sure he has his full time?
Thank you, and I'm honored to be here with all of you and in this discussion. My answer to this question obviously is yes. I think Zionism does have a future in the American left, and the reason I argue that is I think it has to. That's the bottom line. It has to. It's vital that it does for the future of Jews in this country. It's vital that it does for the future of Israel as a liberal democratic project, and I think it's vital for the American people themselves. I think what's happening that prompts this conversation is something of a conspiracy, actually, between folks on the far left who want to force this question and actually mostly folks on the right who would like to make this argument about the left mostly in order to move Jews over to the right and to win elections. And when we become complicit in those two forces shaping this conversation and defining the conversation in this way, we take away agency from the vast majority of American Jews who can best be characterized as liberal Zionists, who still, as a majority, live on the left side of the political aisle. As it is, the Democratic Party is the left side of the political aisle. We take away their agency and we take away our future. The turning point for the American Jewish community's relationship to Zionism in Israel can really, I think, be attributed to Louis Brandeis's conversion to Zionism in 1915 or 1916. At the time, Zionism was an unpopular idea among American Jews who feared being characterized with a dual loyalty. Our position socially, economically, politically in America was far more vulnerable. And Brandeis's conversion through the Zionist Organization of America, which was a different organization then than it is now. His conversion through the Zionist Organization of America made him a powerful ambassador to American Jews to convince them not only that they could be Zionists and support this project in Israel, but that there was nobility for American Jews to support the project of Zionism and the building of the State of Israel in ways that would be reinforcing to their identity as Americans rather than depriving them of those commitments. For Brandeis, who, as you know, was the architect of so many of the major freedoms of the Constitution as we currently understand them in this country, who was identified with the cause of freedom and justice and liberty and democracy, who was referred to by FDR as Old Isaiah, understood as a significant Jewish force, enabled Jews to feel that the commitment to building liberal democracy and a vibrant Jewish future in Israel was identical to the project of what American Jews were trying to do here, that it gave them the nobility to feel like they could be good Americans the same way that Italian Americans and Irish Americans could take pride in their homelands while being at home here. And that worked. It worked for over a half a century, where American Jews of both political persuasions, liberal or conservative, but majority liberal, could identify with Zionism as part of the shared project, could do so as ways to advance those liberal values in America, and who in the same breath could advance, as Kathy talked about, those liberal values in Israel. When we become complicit in the idea today that somehow Zionism can only sit on one side of the political aisle, we take away from American Jews, from American Jewish power, from our capacity to stand with each other, the ability to see our relationship to Israel as intermeshed with the American project fully. We take away from Israel the force of American liberal Jews as primary advocates on behalf of liberal democracy in Israel. Now, there are a lot of reasons why we feel pressured by this moment. There is no question, as I mentioned, that these pressures are coming from the far left, and they're coming from the right that is trying to wedge American Jews away from what are natural, organic, and critical commitments to our liberal values here, as well as our liberal values in Israel. It is not helping that the brand holder of Zionism, the government of the State of Israel, does not embrace these same liberal values that are shared by American Jews on the left, American Jews who identify as liberal. That just means that there is work to do. And I fear that when you ask a question like, does Zionism have a future on the American left, as though we are anticipating that something is supposed to happen, but that question is being posed by people who don't want it to succeed, that we are creating a pathway for a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I will not rest. I know Kathy won't. And I know many, many American Jews on the left will not allow that to happen.
Thank you. And done in exactly 5 minutes. Well done. Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to do something you don't typically hear at a debate. And I'm going to tell you that I wish the resolution that I'm telling you to reject this evening were true. I really wish that Israel and Zionism was a bipartisan issue, that it would still enjoy the bipartisan support that Israel has for most of its life. I think the survival of a liberal democracy in the Middle East, if anything, is a liberal issue, is a left-wing issue. The founders of the State of Israel were socialists. But we're not debating what should be true. We're debating what is true. And sadly, as Bati and I will argue, and as I deeply believe, I don't think that Zionism has a future on the left. Let's look at the statistics. 69% of Democrats view Israel unfavorably. A third, by the way, view Hamas favorably. And party leaders are responding to this. You know, Kathy was talking about how most of the Democrats in Congress are pro-Israel and will stay pro-Israel. This is not going to be the case over the next couple of years. Already, we saw this past July, over half of the Senate Democrats voted for Bernie Sanders' resolution barring arms sales to Israel in the middle of a war. Let's take a look at that very reliable weather vane of political conventional wisdom, Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg was recently asked about Israel's relationship on the same Obama podcast that Bati mentioned, and he said, as Israel's strongest ally and friend, you put your arm around your friend when there's something like this going on, and you talk about what we're prepared to do together. Okay, you give it a day or two. He heard from the base of the Democratic Party. They got really upset with him. And Pete Buttigieg returned, tail between his legs, to apologize and say that he would have supported Bernie Sanders' bill, that he would have voted in recognition of a Palestinian state, and he would oppose, going forward, he would oppose another 10-year military aid agreement. The Arizona senator, potential presidential candidate, Ruben Gallego, recently said his position on Israel is evolving. The Massachusetts congressman, Seth Moulton, who's running for Senate now, sort of apropos of nothing, announced that he will be returning and refusing all donations from AIPAC. And these, by the way, are the supposed moderates in the Democratic Party. And on top of that, it's not the moderation, it's not the moderates where the energy is on the Democratic Party right now, okay? It's the left. That is where the energy and the excitement is in the Democratic Party. And for a sense of where the party is headed, you can just look at this city, where this city is on the verge of electing as its mayor a strident anti-Zionist who refuses to condemn an incitement to violence against Jews, and he's a proud member of a political party, the Democratic Socialists of America, that cheered on October 7th. The DSA, by the way, they should swap out Democratic for National Socialists of America, because that's what they are. I would say that the elevation of Zohran Mamdani is a sign that the European political phenomena that the French call Islamo-gauchisme, Islamo-leftism, is coming to these shores. This is the alliance between the far left and Islamists, which you see most visibly, obviously, in France, but also especially in Britain. As to the few Democrats who stick their necks out for Israel, what happens to them? John Fetterman was mentioned earlier. John Fetterman is accused by his former supporters of being mentally ill. And that's how they explain his support for Israel. They actually published a 6,000-word article in New York Magazine in which a bunch of former staffers anonymously said that he's mentally ill. Richie Torres, okay, he is routinely, yes, we all love Richie Torres. Okay, Richie is routinely subjected to racist attacks, calling him an Uncle Tom who's being controlled by the perfidious Jews. The problem here, I would say, is that we need to distinguish liberalism from progressivism. So the liberalism of Harry Truman and Martin Luther King and Bill Clinton, all of them strident, ardent Zionists, is now being supplanted by the progressivism of Zohran Mamdani, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Jeremy Corbyn, formerly of the British Labour Party. These are different philosophies. Oh, God, I have to, what left to say?
You'll have more time.
What left to say? Oh, one more final issue. A crucial issue for the left, not necessarily liberals, but for the left, is immigration. And I'm sorry to say this, but Jewish life and support for Zionism cannot survive in countries that allow large-scale migration from the Muslim world. You only need to look at Europe to see what's going on, where the French Jewish population is declining. In Britain, the reason why Keir Starmer announced support of a Palestinian state was not because of any real diplomatic concern. It's because he's being held hostage by a major base of support among, in the Labour Party among Muslim immigrants to that country. So if mass immigration and open borders is believed in by the left, again, not by liberals, but by the progressives, that is incompatible with Jewish survival and Zionism.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very powerful opening statements. And look, I've heard there's an election happening somewhere real soon, so let's get right to it. Do you think, or can you give me a reason not to think, Yehuda, Kathy, why the likely next mayor of New York City, Zohran Mamdani, is not also the future of the Democratic Party? Maybe I'll start with you, Kathy.
Well, it's good to start with me because I'm not a New Yorker, and I can tell you that what happens in New York doesn't necessarily apply to the rest of the country. I represent a district in North Carolina, and I can tell you Mamdani would not have a prayer in my part of the country. He ran on issues that he was very smart. He ran on economic issues, the kitchen table issues that are the most important to the New Yorkers who voted for him. He also ran, I'm sorry to say, against a very flawed candidate, which I think played into his hands. But I do not think...
Which flawed candidate?
Thank you for raising that issue. Several flawed candidates. I haven't been quite as tuned into this race as the rest of you have. But I think his position on Israel would be a disqualifier for him in many districts across the country. And when you ask me about is he the future of the Democratic Party, it reminds me of an old cover of New Yorker magazine. Some of you may also be old enough to remember this. It had New York on one side, it had California on the other side, and it had this vast wasteland in between there. Well, I represent the wasteland, and I can tell you what happens in New York, let's hope it stays in New York.
Let me follow up with you, Yehuda, because it is also the case that even if Mamdani, as Kathy pointed out, did not run primarily on the Middle Eastern issues, talked about affordability, things that New Yorkers are concerned with. Elliot Cosgrove, the great rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, made an important point in his sermon last week. And the point was his views on Israel, his strident record of anti-Zionism, appears to cost him nothing among the Democratic base. Why do you agree that that's true? Why do you think that is? And what lesson do you draw from it?
I think there's a few things going on. I think, first of all, you have a powerful recency bias. There's no way Mamdani doesn't have the popularity that he has without the Gaza war, and without the Gaza war going on for 2 years. A war that, by the way, has now become unpopular to all Americans. So much so that the Republican president goes to Israel to persuade the Israeli prime minister to stop the war. That has aided his candidacy. I don't think it's imaginable prior to this point. I think there is some measure of those who are voting for Mamdani, as Kathy said, that relates to a set of political issues who have basically held their nose on the Israel issue, don't believe that it represents significant public policy concerns or safety concerns to Jews. I disagree. I think there are public policy ramifications of an anti-Israel, anti-Zionist mayor, and who are willing to kind of take that risk, living in a period when they feel that the authoritarianism of the Trump administration needs something that is the most powerful antidote that can come against it, which is not represented by Andrew Cuomo. So there are other variables. I think you're right that the shift in political legitimacy around the possibility that these ideas are not disqualifiers is something for us in the pro-Israel world on the Democratic side or on the Republican side to take seriously. And I think that will show up on the right as well over the next number of years with the rise of the isolationism on the right. I think you could look at the same data of the opposition to Mamdani that you heard from hundreds of reform and conservative rabbis around the country and interpret that data quite differently. Those rabbis represent the vast majority of Jews in America. We also bias in our news coverage, in social media and elsewhere, people who speak very loudly without representing constituencies. So yeah, I think there are sources of concern. I'm not making light of it. It's not that it's a small thing, but I think there's enough counter data to say that it doesn't represent that you can't take this moment and say, therefore, I can make a prophetic vision that this is where the future of the party is or where American Jews are headed.
Let me take up the same question on this side. Mamdani's obviously seized the imagination, not just of New Yorkers, but of Americans. But if we were having this conversation about a year ago, Batya, people would have pointed out that Jamal Bowman, strident anti-Zionist congressman from a little bit north of here, Westchester, was primaried by a moderate pro-Israel Democrat, lost a seat. Cori Bush in Missouri, also the same story. There were similar stories elsewhere in the country. So maybe let me start with you, Batya. Kathy's point strikes me as very important. You know, the world does not end at the Hudson River. America does not end there. Why should we think of Mamdani as anything other than a kind of left-wing urban phenomenon? Why do you think this is, or do you think that he is a harbinger for liberals, progressives, and Democrats nationwide?
Well, first of all, again, I feel that you're trying to make us defend a proposition which is not on the table. We're not, well, actually, Jamie and I disagree about this, but I'm not defending the proposition that Zionism has no future in the Democratic Party. It's a question of what the Democratic Party does with what it has. And the signs are not good right now. That doesn't mean that they can't do a 180, but right now they're doing very poorly and they are caving again and again and again to the most radical elements.
But just so just maybe for a point of clarification, what is, in your view, the distinction between the left and the Democratic Party? I mean, broadly speaking, the Democrats, with a handful of exceptions, represent the left side of the political spectrum, and Republicans historically represent the right. So explain to us what you're talking about with the left here.
Well, the left meaning the progressive left, right? The Democratic Party representing, you know, a third to half of the nation. So Kathy is a Democrat, right? You know, you can't take that away from her. A lot of people in this room are Jews who are proud Democrats. But the party is being co-opted by an energy that it's not new. I mean, it's been on college campuses for 40 years, 50 years, but it's entered the mainstream through our media and through elsewhere, and it is now taking over the political spectrum and taking over what used to be concepts that, you know, every Democrat agreed with, like that the state of Israel has a right to exist. And I don't see anybody who is in the Democratic Party right now willing to take on those far left elements. And I think, you know, Kamala Harris, for example, not picking Josh Shapiro for her vice president is a really good example of that. Winning Pennsylvania, she couldn't win the election without Pennsylvania, and she knew that. And in my view, she couldn't pick him because the war in Gaza was going on, and that would have been anathema. And I heard from progressives, we're not ashamed to tell me, oh yeah, he's a non-starter for us, even though he was not more pro-Israel than many of the other candidates. So, you know, that just suggests to you where the center of the party is, and it's not holding. It's sort of being totally colonized by the Zoran Mamdaniism.
You don't think Tim Walz was the ideal vice presidential candidate? Jamie, you want to
regarding Josh Shapiro, some of you in the audience are old enough to remember 25 years ago when Joe Lieberman was selected as Al Gore's vice president on the Democratic ticket. Joe Lieberman was a much more visibly observant Jew than Josh Shapiro. He was more identified as a hawk, as pro-Israel, as hawkish on that subject than Josh Shapiro. And I don't really recall there being much criticism when Al Gore picked Joe Lieberman. In fact, pretty much across the aisle, everyone agreed that the selection of Joe Lieberman was a real boon to the Democratic Party ticket. Now, look at what, you can see the major difference, okay, on the left between how someone like Joe Lieberman was received in the year 2000 and how someone like Josh Shapiro was received in the year 2024.
I want to touch on another side that I think we have to discuss here, which is that whether we're going to define the left as the Democratic Party generally or a part of the Democratic Party, there's no doubt, I think, that an overwhelming majority of Democrats are somewhere between not in sympathy and in violent opposition to the endless government of Benjamin Netanyahu as Prime Minister of the State of Israel. And Yehuda, you kind of touched on this in an earlier remark, which is that some of what is happening seems to be driven by opposition to Bibi. Some of it is happening in response to a view of 1967 Israel post taking over the West Bank and Gaza. And then there's another element, the Mamdani wing, I guess you could call it, which is the 1948 opposition, Israel within any stripe. Do you see any, is it your perception that most leftists or Democrats, I'll let you answer which is which, are really just opposed to the Netanyahu government, its policies, Israeli policy, generally speaking, since 1967, or at least, maybe since the year 2020. How much of this, help us disentangle, how much of this is just opposition to Israeli policy, and how much of it is opposition to Zionism, which is simply the belief that the Jewish people have a right to sovereignty in their ancestral homeland?
I believe, and I see this through our work at the Hartman Institute, working with college students and teenagers and rabbis and Jewish leaders and people around the country, I believe it is overwhelmingly a 1967 issue. It is overwhelmingly that people on the left side of the political aisle, call them the left, call them Democrats, broadly think the state of Israel is legitimate, has a right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, wish it was better at that. Right? But they are not making a broader existential claim about the legitimacy of Israel as a state in the family of nations. Where you see spikes is in periods of war like the one we're in, where after 2 years of war, where there's a broad perception in the international community among many Americans that Israel has the right to defend itself and maybe has defended itself too hard on Gaza, that you start to see a shifting of attitudes where people start signaling, I'm more now on this side than the other side. But I don't trust the permanence of that data, and the good reason to not trust the permanence of that data is because you see it wax and wane in the periods of these conflicts. It happens all the time. I think we are primarily seeing a 67 phenomenon, and we have to embrace that. We have to name it as actually relatively good news. Now, it doesn't mean that it's comfortable for people on the left side of the aisle to have to live through 20 plus years of a Netanyahu administration and the likelihood that the next prime minister following Netanyahu will still be further right than they'll want it to be. It doesn't mean that it's a comfortable place to be, but we know patriotism and loyalty is not about rooting for the people who are running the country that you're passionate about. It is sometimes about being critical of the countries that you belong to or that you're passionate about. I think that is the majority story, and I think we're trusting too much the noisy voice that we hear and thinking that that minor percentage of the community is not only a descriptor of our community, but a predictor of where things are going.
Well, I just want to follow up with Kathy, and then I'll turn to your side. It is the noisy voice. It's also the younger voice. And Kathy, I want to bring this up, which is that I think for maybe many people in this audience, I can only see some of you, but I see many bald heads. So reference points, 1967, 1948, these are things that mean something. But to the students who were either chanting or at least silently approving chants, like from the river to the sea, or we don't want no two-state, we want 48. This is a powerful current of the future of the Democratic Party, and it's expressed by people like David Hogg, who's obviously a young, soon-to-be leading Democrat. You hear these insistent voices among younger voters. What exactly is the Democratic Party doing, if anything, to educate or rebuke those voters?
So I want to go back to a point that my brilliant colleague was making and add to that, which is
which brilliant colleague?
This brilliant colleague right here on my side, on the left side of the aisle. In addition, I think it's not just 67. I also think it is the current Israeli government. And there's one thing I want to point out, which is and this particularly has affected young people and college students, and that is the new media news environment. If you looked at the way social media was promoting what I have to call Hamas propaganda from the very start of the war, that's where young people get their news. Most young people don't get their news watching the news stations that we may watch on the stage. They get their news on social media. They get their news on TikTok. And I had someone come to my office at the very beginning of the Gaza war who left his job because he had seen that for every one pro-Israel video on TikTok, there were 67 anti-Israel videos. That has an impact on how
Jews own TikTok now, so. Jews own TikTok now. So.
When did that happen?
Recently, a year ago.
Is it done, that job? Anyway, but in addition to having this overwhelming social media pro-Palestinian presence, the Israelis really created a vacuum because they never promoted or explained their side of the story. And I think what the Israeli government was busy fighting a war, but they didn't even have an English speaker in the top job in the news media, whatever that job is called in Israel. That was a terrible mistake. And so I think when you're talking about how do we influence young people, particularly with regard to the Gaza war, we have to at least make an effort to tell the Israeli side of the story. Now, how do we educate young people? What's going on our university campuses? That's a whole different issue. We could have a whole additional session here about what has been happening on college campuses, and is the way the Trump administration is the cure worse than the disease?
Can I just add one thing to this, Brett,
Briefly,
on the
'cause I
college
wanna-
side? First of all, it has never been the case that trends that emerge on college campus tell a story of what's about to happen. If that was the case, then the '68 riots across college campuses in America might not have yielded Ronald Reagan within a generation. We assume that these trends are automatically where people are headed, and it is not. Colleges are weird places. They're incubators in certain ways. And it has never been true for the Jewish people over the last 300 years that if you pause the clock at any particular time and said, oh, because of some trend of today, I could tell you where Jewish history is heading in the next 30 or 40 years, it has never been true. And therefore, our job, as response to your original question, in terms of educating the next generation of Jews, we have found that the single most effective way to educate the next generation of Jews is not through TikTok, but by talking to them. And you wind up seeing much more complexity of viewpoint, much more receptivity to understanding the differences between 48 and 67, and much more ripe optimism about where the Jewish future could be.
Do you want to?
Yes, I have to respond to a lot of this. I think there's a lot of wish casting going on from our opponents. It's very comforting for all of us to believe that if only that big bad Bibi were not in power, and if a Rabin type figure were in power, or even a slightly more moderate government, then all of this issue, we wouldn't be debating this issue today. And I don't think that's the case. I think, what was it that has driven opinion against Israel these past 2 years? It's the war of defense to defeat Hamas. And there is no conceivable government in Israel today. Even if Yair Lapid was say, in coalition with Likud, and you got rid of the Smotrich and Ben Gvir, I really don't think that this war would have been fought so differently that the people, that the majority, 69% of Democrats would have expressed more positive views about Israel. I think that's a really comforting, false thing to tell ourselves, and it's a failure to confront the reality that we're dealing with, which is that people on the left do not believe that Israel has a right to defend itself effectively, which means that Israel does not have a right to exist as a Jewish state.
I want to push back a little, and maybe Batya, you can take this on. I think there are a lot of people, whether on the left or in the Democratic Party, who would say, I supported Israel on October 7th. I supported Israel's right to defend itself. What I do not support is a Gaza that, at least from the air, looks to be wiped out. I do not support a policy that seems gratuitously excessive, that seems to feel no compunction about wiping out entire neighborhoods to get at one Mohammed Deif or another terrorist leader. That is not inconsistent, that opposition to that Israeli policy, that revulsion in their view to that Israeli policy, is not inconsistent with a belief that a Jewish democratic state has a right to exist. And I hear that all the time, especially where, among people I work with. Is that not, tell us, Batya, what your response to that argument is?
Well, Jamie, do you want to take it first?
Well, I would just say that's a philosophical belief, right? You can say, I don't like the war and how bad it was, and I wish they just toned it down a little bit. but I'm still a Zionist. I still support Zionism. That's a philosophical reality. That's a philosophical irreality, okay? Because as I just said, I don't think there was a way of fighting this war that any Israeli government would have fought it, that would have been so less destructive or thoroughgoing, whatever adjective you want to use to describe it, in the real world, not in the fantasy world, where you can somehow defeat Hamas without killing a single civilian, which is what most of the people on the left now seem to believe. In the media, in Hollywood, in all the areas of our American society that the left dominates, they really seem to believe that their Zionism is contingent upon Israel defending itself only if no civilians are killed. That's impossible. It's always been impossible, and therefore your Zionism is not really Zionism at that point. You're just a fraud. Thank you. So I don't.
Do you want to add to this?
Well, what I would say is there are people who, on October 7th, for 6 months, for a year, supported Israel very strongly, and then at some point said, it's enough, they should end the war. They're called Republicans. We were there on October 7th and October 8th and November
wasn't that
and
true of the
December.
Biden administration too?
We were there. The left did not have our backs for a second, okay? This gaslighting that somehow, like they were supportive for a while and then got sick of it, as Jamie says, by the way, the lowest combatant to civilian ratio in urban warfare history. That to me is just, we were there, like I was there doing these debates like this about the war in Gaza a month in, 3 months in, and they were already saying, well, I would support Israel defending itself, but just not like this. Like, they haven't even invaded Gaza yet. Like, we were there for, we saw the abandonment of Zionists and Zionism and Israel and American Jews by all the people who were our allies and all the people we stood side by side for when it was their fights. And the abandonment by women's movements, women's organizations over the rape, and just like the betrayal goes so deep. So yeah, now they're saying, oh yeah, I was with you in the beginning, but I've sort of gone off it. Like, no, I was there too, and you weren't.
Also, the famine and genocide. The famine accusations, and what I consider to be the greatest mass delusion of the 21st century, the accusation that Israel committed a genocide in Gaza. Those started before Israel even launched a military operation in Gaza. And the left started those slanders. The left started those slanders before Israel even defended itself.
Kathy, you wanted to...
I want to make one comment on with regard to would any prime minister have fought the war the same way? I don't know. We'll never know. But we do know that his own military leadership disagreed with him, and he let them go. So let's not assume that everything he has done was perfect. We also know that he made the decision to withhold humanitarian aid for 2 months, which I don't know what that accomplished other than feeding into the narrative that Hamas already had out there, which was that the Israelis were trying to starve the Gazans. If they'd continued the food, humanitarian aid going into Israel for those 2 months, would that have made a difference? Maybe, it might have. With regard to the Democrats weren't there, I was in Congress during all that time. We passed 2 additional supplemental...
I said the left, I didn't say the Democrats.
Democrats are the left. I walked in every day to that House chamber. I sat on the left side of the aisle. I mean, if you want to know who the Democrats are, look at who they elect. Don't look at who the far right, far left loudest voices are, who are on the, on national TV shows, who are so busy creating a public persona for themselves that they're not actually doing the hard work of legislating in Congress. I can tell you, the people who were the loudest voices who are out there saying the ridiculous things, they're not the ones who are doing the heavy lifting in the chambers of Congress, in the hearing rooms, passing legislation, getting members to support their legislation. Those are the workhorses, and for the large part, those are the people who are pro-Israel.
I'd like to touch on a kind of, Batya, I think, has rightly pointed out this question of ideology and separating politics from ideology. And we really are talking about the left as an ideological movement. It's a broad one, obviously. But Yehuda, you said something at the beginning which struck me, which is you said that there has to be Zionism on the left. that it is, in a sense, if I understand you rightly, that it is intrinsic to the spirit of the left that it would support a movement of self-determination and national liberation, which is Zionism. Flaws and warts and all, that it is central to thinking, to being a person of the left, that at some level you must support Zionism. My guess is that Batya would say it's exactly the opposite, or at least the way the left has constructed its worldview today, that Zionism cannot philosophically have a place in their view of the world because it's based on notions of privilege, settler colonialism, and a whole set of ideas all of which, whether advertently or inadvertently, don't have a place for Zionism. And I'd like to spend the last few minutes of this moderated talk getting to this philosophical question. So tell us why, and don't take up all the time because I want to get to this side, but tell us in a nutshell, why is it you think that Zionism and the left have, in a way, a kind of a no-divorce kind of relationship?
Listen, it could happen, right? I'll put it like this. There is a movement on the left here in America and globally that positions itself as anti-nationalist. Those who position themselves as completely anti-nationalists use Israel as kind of the case study of attacking ethnic nation states and claiming that they're a product of colonialism and that they should be dismantled. They generally have a problem with their own identities, which they don't interrogate. This is one of the Mamdani things that I find most troubling, which is, there's no chance in hell he shows up at the Salute to Israel parade in New York. I'm sorry to disappoint any of you who expect him to be there. But he will show up to the Pakistani Day in New York, as he has in the past. And that betrays
That's because Pakistan is not a state based on religion.
That's what I'm saying. That's the point, right? Right, that's exactly the point, which is...
I just have to defend...
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point, which is the anti-nationalism is always going to be rooted in a little bit of hypocrisy, right? So for most liberals, their commitment to what it means to try to advance the cause of freedom and democracy and justice requires some sort of a political framework to do so, and the nation state is one of those things. So that's inherent to the idea of Zionism. We need a state to be able to advance these values. To me, it feels like intrinsic to why I describe myself as a liberal Zionist, why I think that's coherent to most liberal Zionists who are here. And part of our job is to repudiate that notion that the anti-nationalist voice should become the way in which we characterize what it means to be a liberal.
I do, but I want to get to Batya because you've thought deeply, well, not that you haven't, Jamie, but I think you've thought deeply about these philosophical issues. I think it's part of your new book, right? Tell us why you think Yehuda's wrong.
Well, as you said earlier, ventriloquizing me so accurately, it sounded like it was coming from you, but truly my thoughts. But the left, the ideology that powers the left is this idea that you sort of throw away the Judeo-Christian, actually Muslim as well, worldview that's based on the distinction between right versus wrong and virtue versus evil, and that we should strive to do good things as people and avoid doing bad things as evil. They throw that away and they say, no, the only distinction that matters is the one between the powerful and the powerless. And everybody who has power is inherently evil, and whoever is powerless is inherently virtuous. Their abjection is their virtue. And they then superimpose onto that binary race or gender or what have you. So all white people are powerful colonizers and oppressors and inherently evil. And all people of color are inherently powerless. They have no agency, and thus they are inherently virtuous, and they have no moral responsibilities. And this, by the way, explains why the left ended up siding with Hamas. Because if you are in that abject, powerless group, you have no moral responsibilities, and people in the powerful group have no right to judge you. They have no moral authority. This is the worldview that was sort of cooked up by the French postmodernists and post-structuralists. It was imported through the university system in the 70s and the 80s, and then because of the way our economy worked, to where having a college degree became a sort of upward funnel into the American dream, the people who got access to positions of power in America had gone through this education system. And as a person who had to teach composition after getting a PhD in English literature, I can tell you, you can't graduate from a university today without going through a class that has this differential, this worldview, just basically cooked in it. And that's sort of, this is what leftist ideology is. Like, there's no way to have that ideology and come out on Israel's side, because Israel does have more power than Hamas. Thank God, right? So we were always on this collision course. And it used to be, if you talk to Abe Foxman, he'll say, you think they liked Jews on college campuses in the 70s? Like, a lot of you were there, right? Like, they always had this problem, but it was sort of limited to the upper echelons of, our culture, and then it got totally mainstreamed through the media. That's what my first book was about, if anybody wants to read more about this. So basically, that tension, what had been the basis of American Jewish identity for 100 years, we were Jews and therefore we were liberals. It has now become a conflict. They've stolen that from us because the left is importing this ideology that sees us as oppressors and as evil. And by the way, the answer of the ADL, which is, you guys put us on the wrong side of the binary. We're oppressed, don't you get it? Wrong answer.
We only have 3 minutes left, and I really have to stress that
we have more time. Don't
okay. We've spoken almost exclusively about the political left, but that's not what the resolution is about. It's about the broader left. So that means the mainstream media, which is I would say that's part of the left. It's left of center, the mainstream media. Does anyone here think the mainstream media has a pro-Zionist bias? Elite higher education, secular madrasas. Does anyone think that elite higher education has a pro-Zionist bias? In the culture, okay, look at Hollywood. 50 years ago, Vanessa Redgrave could get up and give an Academy Award acceptance speech and attack Zionist hoodlums, her words, protesting her outside. And what happened? The great director Paddy Chayefsky got up and he rebuked her, and he said he was tired of people exploiting the Academy Awards for the propagation of their own personal political propaganda. And he received a standing ovation for saying that. What happens now, today? 2 years ago, a Jewish film director who directed a movie about Auschwitz gets up there accepting an award and says that Auschwitz is being hijacked by Israel to oppress Palestinians. And Steven Spielberg says nothing at that same event. Okay? So Hollywood, I would also say, is anti-Zionist. You have to think about these other institutions that the left controls. It's not just the Democratic Party. I would say politics and the Democratic Party are the least thing. I worry about them the least for the reasons that Kathy has said, and there are great Democrats fighting for Israel, obviously, but in these other very influential the art world, okay, the art world is totally anti-Zionist. After October 7th, practically every artistic organization in this country put out statements attacking Israel. Those are all left-wing institutions. So before you vote on this, you need to consider that aspect. Thank you.
I just want to, we have 40 seconds left. Before we go to your questions, which I hope are going to be brought to me in a moment, but Yehuda said something that's wonderful and I happen to agree with, which is that people tend to grow up from college. And that what happens on campuses doesn't necessarily explain what happens later on. So what is giving you hope now other than biology, that people are going to grow up?
Look, first of all, I spend a lot of time with young people, partly because I have a bunch in my house, and also because in our work we encounter young people, and people in real life are not the avatars that they are as we experience them in media. They are not the caricatures that we like to fear because we have some version of it that shows up in technologies that older people think that young people are fixated with but don't fully understand. They are actually searchers. There are we have focused very heavily on very particular campuses that have very particular problems, and we are ignoring many college campuses at our peril, where this is just not what is tearing young people apart. Ilana Horwitz, a sociologist at Tulane, wrote a great piece today in JTA, where she talked about how her classes on Jewish studies are full, and when she sent to them, like, what are the 4 or 5 issues you want to talk about? It wasn't anti-Semitism, and it wasn't Israel-Palestine. And she was like, oh, something interesting is going on. And she said, so as a social scientist, she interviewed her students. And it reported back, and she said, this is happening in many other campuses. A lot of students are saturated with anti-Semitism and talk of anti-Semitism and ways in which the adults in their lives are concerned for them about what they're supposed to be concerned about. And they are actually interested in talking about what Judaism, Jewish community, and Jewish life has to offer. And when we, as a Jewish community that cares deeply about Israel and about the fight in anti-Semitism, when we can find ways to communicate with our young people that those are pieces of what it means to be Jewish, but that there's a larger heritage that we can connect to, not only do we create a better pathway for them to build a powerful Jewish life, which I think is taking place in partly because of the war, this surge, but we also signal to them that a commitment to Israel and Zionism is not this weird thing. It's actually connected to what it means to be a serious Jew. And on that, and what I see among young people, I'm enormously optimistic.
Thank you. We have a few good questions from the audience, and I think I'm going to ask this of you, Kathy. There appears to be a growing rupture between the Black and Jewish communities, specifically around the topic of Israel. Do you agree that that is so? Why is that the case? Is it a harbinger of things to come on the topic of Zionism in American politics?
I think to the extent that I wouldn't call it a rupture, but I would say that there is some growing disagreement. And I think it's not over whether Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state, but I think it's specifically over what's happening in Gaza. I think as I have gone to Black churches, and in my district I went to lots and lots and lots of Black churches, and also I would say it's generational. It's not the older Black community. It tends to be the younger people. A lot of them are on college campuses, and I think there has been a focus on the images of hungry people in Gaza, of the destruction, the rubble, cities turned to rubble. I think that is being seen as an issue that they don't understand why we're not confronting that issue. So my hope is that as the war ends and we start to see rebuilding, and we see Hamas removed, God willing, and we start to see the rebuilding of Gaza, those feel, and also we have tough conversations. I know some of my fellow Democrats, particularly in North Carolina, are starting to focus on how do we rebuild these relationships with the Black community. We can't just say we were there in the civil rights movement. We have to talk about what's going on today. And I think there's intentional rebuilding of these relationships that will be easier once the war is over.
I want to ask you, Jamie, in connection to this. You said in your first statement that what's happening is not simply a function of ideological currents; it's a function of demography, and people say demography is destiny. So, do you think that is it your view that this is a kind of a demographic inevitability that people turn against Zionism?
Well, we can look at the examples. We can look at Europe, which has been importing large numbers of people from...
But we're talking about the United States.
The United States. Well, look, the United States assimilates immigrants much better than Europe does. But we haven't really had the experience of people coming to this country from parts of the world where anti-Semitism is endemic to that society. Okay, most of our immigration, or a large portion of it, comes from Latin America. And though people from that part of the world don't carry the same anti-Semitic sentiments, certainly not to the same degree, it's not as pervasive in Mexico than it is.
I grew up in Mexico.
Well,
there's plenty of anti-Semitism.
Is it as bad in Mexico as it is in
it's not,
Egypt?
of
Okay,
course.
so I'm just saying, we need to be more we need to be more thoughtful and in our immigration policy. We all should have a say as Americans in which people come to this country. Okay? Not everyone has a right to come to this country. No one has a right to come to America. It's a great privilege. And I fear, looking at a lot of the ringleaders of these protests on campuses over the past 2 years, while I don't think that anyone should be deported for their constitutionally protected free speech, I have to question why, out of all the people in the world who want to come to this country, why are we allowing so many people who hate this country and who hate Israel? Why are we giving spots to them?
Yehuda or Kathy, sorry, I'm almost 52 here. So tell us pragmatically what it would take to keep Zionism as part of the American left. Like, what have we got to do? You've touched on this a little bit. Tell us a little more, either one of you.
I think we have to have these kinds of conversations over and over, and we have to reach out to people. We have to, look, one of the reasons that I was willing to take on my board chairmanship at Democratic Majority for Israel is because I saw when I was in Congress that the knowledge about Israel, the knowledge about anti-Semitism, of people who truly came in as pro-Israel people, the knowledge was maybe an inch deep. And so we need to do more to educate members of Congress, to educate candidates, to educate students. People don't understand the region that Israel is in. They don't understand the history of anti-Semitism. I had one colleague on the House floor ask me, can you explain anti-Semitism to me? And when I said, sure, on one foot, it's the oldest shape-shifting conspiracy theory that blames on the Jews whatever the ills of society is, from the Crusades to the Inquisition. And he stopped me and he said, the Inquisition, I thought that was against the infidels. I said, who do you think the infidels were to the Catholic king and queen of Spain? So we need to educate people. And you stopped by, you only asked Yehuda what gave him hope. What gives me hope is that we are having this conversation, and that Jews all across the country are having this conversation. And when troubles erupt, and when we see that there are problems confronting the Jewish community, I never count the Jews out. I think we will figure out ways to deal with this issue.
You want to say another word?
Yeah, I mean, look, the single biggest threat that I think Jews are doing right now to perpetuate the threats that are being cast against us is by abandoning historical relationships that we cultivated with other communities in this country, and doing so because of fear, and abandoning the work that Jews did for a long time to fight anti-Semitism in this country, which was by building institutions, building a democratic culture, and supporting democratic norms. We are operating in a climate of fear, and it's actually making our community turn inward, when what worked for so long was actually the opposite. And I learned this in a relationship that I built via the Maimonides Fund, actually, with a really important black civic leader who described to me what happened. He said, my people are broadly with the Jewish community, but they get very suspicious of the Jewish community when the Jewish community gets triggered by a particular thing, for instance, that happens by a black leader, and then they start going down some racist path and throwing out those relationships with their other black partners, and then our partners shy away and say, well, wait a second, are you actually with our community, or are you now constructing us as your opponent?
You think it's the Jews who have abandoned the black-Jewish relationship?
I do, actually. I do. I'll give you, if you want an example, I'll give you a powerful example. This person, who is a friend of the Jewish people, said to me, he said, I as a leader was upset and embarrassed by Claudine Gay's testimony at Congress, as when she was president of Harvard, and her inability to talk coherently about defending the Jewish community. And he said, and then I watched as many of my friends in the Jewish community started talking about Claudine Gay as a diversity hire. And he said, in my network, we know in the black community that a person like that does not get to the role of becoming president of Harvard because somebody was favoring her and elevating her above qualified candidates. We view a person like that as having achieved something that none of us could do.
She never published a book.
And when you do that, You condescend to the black community about the people who are talented in their midst, and you lose your friends. Now, I don't want to get into a game of who started this, right? But we have historical, deep relationships with other faith communities, with other ethnic communities, and in moments of crisis like this, if you feel that you are falling back, right, and losing your position, our job is to invest in those relationships as opposed to start playing some sort of blame game.
Last question. Last question from the audience before we go to final statements, and I'm going to give this to you, Batya. Do you think the divide exists more between generations rather than along party or ideological lines? And one reason I ask is because I know a few of us on this stage don't have the views we held, so I'm speaking for myself not least, 5, 10, 15 years ago, Lord knows, more than 30 years ago when I was an undergrad. So why do you think don't you think that maybe today's progressives will just grow up on this subject?
All right, I'm going to talk about the right. I sort of didn't want to do this because, again, we're not saying the right is perfect. I don't think that at all. There's a lot of anti-Semitism on the right now. Charlie Kirk, before he was assassinated, did a focus group with young people, young conservative leaders. This was maybe a month before he was killed. He had about 5,000 young people come to his Student Action Summit. And he asked them how they felt about Israel. We see all these polls that young people in the Republican Party are also sort of ditching Israel and don't support Israel. But when he polled them, 75% said that they were pro-Israel. And he did a focus group, and I encourage you all to watch it. It's really educational. It's on YouTube. He asked them to talk about Israel. And again, they were by and large called themselves pro-Israel, but they were very against funding for Israel because they're against funding for any country because they can't afford to buy homes. And they feel really resentful that all of these billions of dollars are going sort of to other countries to solve their problems when we have so many problems at home. So they would say, of course we want the Christian holy sites to be under Jewish control, not Muslim control. This is an obvious thing to them. Of course we support Israeli sovereignty. Some of them are Catholic. They don't hold by that same Protestant view, but most of them were Protestant and had that view of the chosen people and the protectiveness that Americans have always felt towards Jews. But all of which is to say that the polling will not reflect this nuance. The polling will show that young people in both parties are really turning on Israel, but when you speak to young conservatives, they have a very different view of what that means. They're sort of sick of the aid, they were sick of the war, but they call themselves pro-Israel at the end of the day. Whereas young people on the left, again, it is so endemic to how they see the world to have an opposition to the very idea of Jewish nationalism and the very idea of Jewish sovereignty. So I think it is more sides than it is generational, although of course the generational divide is big.
We are now moving to our closing arguments, and we will do them in the same order with which we began. So
I'm up?
You're up.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Thank you. For the 4 years I was a member of Congress, things in Israel were in turmoil. From May 2021, when Hamas fired almost 4,500 rockets into Israel, to Israel's internal protests over proposed judicial reforms, to Hamas's horrific and barbaric attack on October 7th. Anti-Semitism on the rise for a decade exploded after October 7th, leaving Jews feeling isolated, abandoned, and deeply concerned about the future. Throughout that time, I worked with my Democratic colleagues, introducing pro-Israel resolutions, meeting with hostage families, holding pro-Israel events on the steps of the Capitol, introducing legislation, and working to get support for supplemental funding for Israel. I found broad spread support from my Democratic colleagues. As the war in Gaza continued and images of the devastation saturated social media, it was not surprising that some Democrats questioned the Israeli government's policies and plans for Gaza. And it's not surprising that loud voices on the far left made serious allegations about Israel's actions and intentions. This was frustrating, one-sided, and painful to hear, just as it was painful to hear isolationists on the right call for an end to aid for Israel and engage in anti-Semitic comments that revealed the legacy of Nazi propaganda on the far right. At no time did I hear my Democratic colleagues call to end the U.S.-Israel alliance. At no time did I hear them suggest that it was time to destroy the Zionist reality of self-determination for the Jewish people in their homeland. As the peace plan is implemented, I expect Democrats to continue their historic support for the only country in the Middle East that, much like our own country, is far from perfect, but will always work to live up to its democratic values.
Thank you. Batya?
So first of all, again, thank you so much. Thank you. This was really, I learned a lot, and I'm in a different place than when I came here, so I thank you both very much for that. I want to say that for 100 years, what it really meant to be an American Jew was to be a liberal, was to be on the left. And I'm going to talk to the Democrats here because I think probably the Republicans already agree with us on the resolution. This was our birthright as American Jews. If you stopped an American Jew on the street and said, why do you vote for the Democrats? They would say, because I'm Jewish. You know, this was very much a central component of our identity. And what it meant to be on the left for 100 years was to support labor and to support unions and collective bargaining so that the little guy has a chance against massive corporations. It meant to support civil rights. You know that the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge happened 20 years after the liberation of Auschwitz, just 20 years. It meant to support equal opportunity. Today, what it means to be on the left is Greta Thunberg in her stupid keffiyeh on her stupid flotilla, you know? Like, that's the left. It's Zoran Mamdani saying, you know, I don't believe that Israel has a right to exist as a Jewish state. They're stealing your birthright from you. And again, I am not defending the proposition that there's no future for us in the Democratic Party. That would be a catastrophe for this country. We need two good political parties. What I'm saying is that you're going to have to fight for your party the way I know that so many of you already have, because the left, as it is today, does not have a future in it for Zionism.
Thank you. Yehuda, your closing statement?
Yeah, I've been to Israel about a dozen times since October 7th, including the week after, and I spent a lot of the time over the last 2 years talking to Israelis, Jews, and Palestinians about their emotional state, their state of mind, what it has been like to live through these couple of years. And at a particularly low time last summer, I sat with two colleagues, one Jewish, one Palestinian citizen of Israel, and I asked them the same question separately, which is, what's going to make you leave eventually? Right? That option is available to them. What's going to make you leave? And both of them looked at me and said the same thing, and in English, the same version of what's been a Zionist anthem for a long time, which is Ein li eretz acheret. I have nowhere else to go. I'm here. That's what my project is. And that actually was sad and inspiring to me, watching both Jews and Palestinians say, we're here, and we're on the side of finding alternatives to live in peace and dignity and freedom for all of us between the river and the sea. I want American Jews to have the same attitude. If you genuinely believe that Zionism can't have a future in this country, really on either side of the political aisle, you know, maybe pack your bags. But if you believe that you are part of this country as a liberal American Jew, as I am religiously and politically, that you are blessed with the possibility of feeling, I have no other land, and it applies to two places and not just one. Your relationship to Israel, your homeland, and your relationship to here, you have to reject the possibility that this question becomes answered as yes. You have to reject it, and you have to fight against it, and you have to make it irrelevant.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'd also like to thank our opponents, very worthy opponents, and I learned a lot in discussion with you, so thank you. And I'm going to end where I began. And I wish that I agreed with them. I really want to agree with them. It'd be really bad, okay, if the Republican Party were the only pro-Zionist party. And by the way, I'm not sure that that's even true in the near future, okay? Tucker Carlson, I believe, is the most influential anti-Semite in this country. And he's on the right, okay? So again, we're not arguing that the right is better. We're arguing simply what the reality is. And the reality is, as much as I want it to be true that there's a future for Zionism on the left, I'm afraid that I don't see it happening. And I think, to get back to what we were talking about, what Batya was talking about, is understanding the philosophy of whatever you want to call it, wokeness, the successor ideology, progressivism, this 2020 madness that swept the country and particularly the left. It has very deep roots, particularly among young people who will rise into positions of leadership, and ideas have consequences. And anti-Zionism, much to my regret, is an idea that has wide purchase on the left. And remember, we're not just debating politics tonight. You have to think about the arts community. You have to talk about culture, higher education, media, all these other sense-making institutions that the left essentially controls. Anti-Zionism is the default position in those environments today. It is. It is the default position. If you walk into one of those schools or one of those buildings and you're having a conversation with someone, they will assume that you are anti-Zionist. That's just the sad reality that we have to deal with.
Thank you very much. And now we're coming very close to the end, but we have one thing that we at SAPIR feel strongly about, which is that we are on this stage not as enemies, we're on the stage as friends, whatever position that you've taken. Everyone, not just on the stage, but I hope in this audience shares a deep conviction that what we want is a thriving Jewish future. It is the motto of SAPIR, and it is, I think, really the purpose of the 92nd Street Y, and it's why this union for us is such a fruitful and wonderful one. Last, final round, and each of you get 1 minute, is what we call one good point. So, we're going to do two things right now. You guys are going to vote again on the proposition because these debates are supposed to be fun and supposed to have a notional winner. And while you vote, okay, we are going to ask each one of you for just a minute or so to offer one good point about the other side. So Yehuda, let's start with you.
Thank you. I want to just return to something you said, Batya, near the end, actually, in your example about the Charlie Kirk focus group. It's something I'm going to think about more, which is why it is that, that young folks on the left and young folks on the right may actually wind up having similar ideas about holding back aid from Israel or support from Israel or various ambivalences even about Israel and Israeli policy, but they come to the conclusion that that yields them to identify as pro-Israel and anti-Israel. And I want to think about that as whether, I think you portray it as a definitional issue, and I want to think about it as an educational challenge.
Batya.
I admire your hope. And Kathy, I'm so glad you brought up President Biden's early trip to Israel. That meant a lot to Israelis, a lot. And we can quibble about how he handled things later on, but in that moment, we shouldn't forget that that happened and we shouldn't erase it. That was an incredible thing to do. And it just had a very deep impact on me and on the Israelis that I know. So thank you for bringing that up.
Kathy.
Let me just say how much I have thoroughly enjoyed being on stage with all of you. And I guess I was so focused on thinking about this through the political lens, because that's the world I've been living in for the past 4 years, and that's the world I'm focused on right now in my new position, that I frankly had forgotten about what you mentioned, James. And I spent a lot of time, because I chaired the House Bipartisan Task Force to combat anti-Semitism, I spent a lot of time thinking about the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism in Hollywood, among authors, I think it was even the psychiatrists.
Everywhere.
I mean, you get rid of Jewish psychiatrists. Where are you? You know, so
We invented it.
yeah, good luck, everybody, solving your problems. And we can't just focus on, and I spent a lot of time thinking about education because of my role on the education committee and listening to those college presidents who were just deer caught in the headlights. But I thank you for reminding me that we also have this battle beyond the college campuses and beyond elected officials. And it's really frightening. A good friend of mine whose husband is a producer said, you have no idea what's going on in Hollywood. It's like blacklisting again. Yeah. So thank you for raising that. And the Academy Awards example, which just, there's certain shows I won't watch now.
Yeah, well, so much for the Jews control Hollywood.
If we do, we're not doing a good job.
And also, if you got rid of the psychiatric patients, there'd be no profession either.
Jamie, last word.
I want to point out something Yehuda said, which is that just because something is really bad right now doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be bad in the future, and that this could be a temporary moment that we're in, having a lot to do with this particularly brutal war, a terrible, awful war, like nothing really any of us, I haven't seen in my lifetime. And I think, if you can't tell, I'm a pessimist. So that's why I agreed to do this debate.
Are you a pessimist or a Jewish pessimist?
A Jewish pessimist. And so sometimes you have to stop and stand back and really ask yourself, you know, the Jewish people have been through a hell of a lot worse than what we're going through right now. So keep that in mind, keep that perspective.
Once again, as we await the results, for the results to be tabulated, I really want to thank Kathy and Yehuda and Batya and Jamie. Oh, I guess they've been tabulated. And I'm going to turn around in a second to announce this. I want to thank the teams at SAPIR and the 92nd Street Y. I want to thank you in the audience for being fantastic. Fantastic, a fantastic audience. 0 hecklers.
4%.
We made no Mossad dollars. And how did we do?
We lost.
So it looks like
We're doomed.
the noes have it, but not by much. But the needle was moved. Jamie, Batya, the debate is yours. Kathy, Yehuda, thank you for an incredible debate. Thank you.
Good job.